So this is chapter 6, Ecology Preserving the Animal Kingdom. So when we deal with ecology, it is the study of the relationship of organisms to their environment and to the other organism. So bali, this is not only studying the environment but also the interaction of living organisms with other biotic factors at the same time, how the organism react to the abiotic components found within the environment. So animals and their abiotic environment. So habitat in a certain habitat or called the environment may consist two components, two major components, the biotic and the abiotic. When we say biotic, it refers to all living organisms, from the microorganism going to the macroorganism. So in short, bacteria to the largest living organism like elephant. Then, abiotic, this involves yung mga non-living like rock, soil, air, water, light, other chemicals. Those are non-living components. That's why other term for that for abiotic component. Another terminology when we deal on ecology, we have their tolerance range. Tolerance range, animals live within a certain range of values. So, another thing, we have range of optimum, a certain range of values within the tolerance range. Limiting factor out of an animal's tolerance range, and taxis, that is the response of a living organism to a biotic factor. So how do we apply these terminologies? Based on this graph, when we say optimal range, this is the favorable condition of all organisms to thrive in. So based on the diagram, we have here an example of an ants. Ants have the optimal range of the certain aspect of their environment. So it shows a greater population, showing greater amount of population of ants on a specific area. But we have here sa left and the right side corner, we have here the zone of stress, the zone of tolerance, the same thing with the right side, zone of stress and the zone of tolerance. So this is the area where it is no longer favorable or non-tolerable for the organism to live in. In short, these are the extreme environments. And if we say extreme, the population of these animals are smaller compared to the population of the optimal animals living on the optimal range. Important to discuss on the flow of energy. So when we say energy based on physics, it is the ability to do work. Heterotrophic, autotrophic. So these are types of organisms based on how they acquire energy. Heterotrophic acquire the energy to another organism. One good example of a heterotrophs are humans, because we eat another living organism, we eat plants, animals, we get our energy from those um, organisms. While autotrophic, these are organisms that they have the ability to manufacture their own food. One good example are the plants, algae. Um, some protozoans may have the ability to reproduce their own food because they have the chlorophyll in their cell, and they are called autotrophic. Auto, they have the ability, automatic, they have the ability to produce their own energy, food for energy. So, energy budget, this is the total energy intake and the description of how the energy is used and lost. So temperature is another limiting factor aside from energy in the environment because the temperature influences the behavior of the animal. It also influences the metabolic activity of a certain animal. Like for example, um, animals living in a four season biomes. Usually, they have majority of them may undergo winter sleep, or during winter, most of the animals undergo hibernation. Okay, that affects their behavior. That is a simple adaptation to fit in that kind of situation of the environment. In order for them not to suffer hypothermia, they undergo um, they undergo hibernation because during winter also food supply are very limited. Torpor. Torpor is a time of decreased metabolism and lowered body temperature. One good example, we have here the bird. I think this is a nectarine bird in which controls its metabolic activity. We have also the bats as undergoing torpor. Hibernation occurs also in small animals like the squirrels, kangaroo rats. So this is a type of rodent. Winter sleep occurs in large animals like the bear, black bear, grizzly bears. So these are their adaptation in order to protect themselves from winter. Since during winter, there are only limited supply of food. So in order to cope such a limiting factor in food resources, they have to undergo winter sleep. Estivation is a period of inactivity in some animals that must withstand extended periods of drying. For example, if there's a drought or less amount of rainfall, some animals have to bury or hide under burrows. There are also fishes like lungfishes. Lungfishes will have to dig on the mud and build a certain casing just to protect themselves from drying. Even though there's no more water, they could survive because they have their gas bladder that will serve as their respiration. It also act like our lungs to them. So that is estivation. Now, other biotic factors that influences the living organism's behavior and other biochemical or physiological aspect, we have the moisture, light, geology, and soil. So it is defined as the group of individuals of the same species that occupy a given area at the same time and have a unique attributes. Like for example, population, human population, bird population, insect population, fly population, termite population. So population growth, we have here type 1 convex, type 2 diagonal, and type 3 is concave. And as we have to determine from the following diagram, so this is type 1 humans, the type 2 we have the squirrels, and the type 3 are mussels or a certain mollusca. So on the x axis, we have the number of survivors, and on the y axis, we have the percentage of maximum lifespan. In type 1, is defined as the survive to an old age, then die rapidly. So human is a good example of type 1 curve. While the type 2, defined as the diagonal, have constant probability of death throughout their lives because these animals are prone to exposed to different predators. Maraming kakain sa kanya na bigger animals. In type 3, we have here concave experience very high juvenile mortality. Why juvenile mortality? Because the muscles, the larval stages are free swimming, and there will be an instances that this larva of a certain mollusk will be eaten by large fishes and other corals. So high probability that the juveniles could no longer survive in the aquatic environment. So exponential growth, we have the population increased by the same ratio per unit time. And we have environmental resistance, carrying capacity that symbolizes by K, and logistic population growth that refers to the growth curve assume a sigmoid or flattened or S shape and the population growth. So this is how the population growth. So we have there the exponential growth that directly goes up. A logistic growth, we have there the plateau aspect of the graph. And the K is defined as the carrying capacity in which the habitat can sustain or hold or can supply all the needs of the organism in order to survive. So that is the carrying capacity. Population regulation is the condition that an animal must meet to survive are unique for every species. So it depends on the species. Population density, it is an independent factors influenced by the number of animals in the population without regard the number of individuals. It also, we have density dependent factors that more severe when population density is high or sometimes very low than there are other densities. So when you have this kind of research already, we have to compute for the densities of a specific species in relation to its environment. So we have in the environment also we have different interactions. We have two major interactions. We have the intraspecific and the interspecific interactions. We have the intra and the inter. So intraspecific competition among members of the same species. So remember, but if we have an interaction of the same species, that is intra. If we have an interaction of different species in a community, that is inter. So one good example, um, si Juan de la Cruz tried to court Maria, and the competitor of Juan de la Cruz is si Fernando. That is one good example, courtship. That is an intraspecific. One good example also, courtship among birds of the same species. That is intraspecific. Territorial disputes. That is also intraspecific. But it could also be inter. Interspecific interactions, examples, we have herbivory and predation, interspecific competition, coevolution, and symbiosis. What are these different types of interaction? So we have here an example of intraspecific competition. Another example, we have competition among members of the same species, like we have here the grizzly bear are fighting for the fish as their food item. So food source could also be a limiting factor between species. Herbivory and predation. The herbivores, like the gazelles, the horses, zebras, and within the zebra population, zebras are also competing on the supply of grasses. Predators like the lions are also competing, aside from having the mate, they also compete with the food. In the interspecific competition, when members of the different species compete for resources. In the diagram, for example, we have here the gazelle and the zebra are competing on the water resource in a small pond. Coevolution, when species are competing for the same resource or during predator-prey interaction. Like for example, in this bird, the bird competes with the bees in getting all the nectar in that flower. So hummingbird is a coevolution with other insect that also feeds on the flower, and the flower are dependent on these pollinators. Symbiosis arising through the coevolution come from two different species living in continuing intimate association. So it is an example of coevolution. So there's an interaction, or there's different uh, one one component is giving a benefit to the other component and vice versa. So, but we have either it is a positive, negative interaction. So, for example, here we have parasitism. Parasitism is a negative interaction because this is a relationship between the host. Usually, the hosts are the largest organism, and the parasite. The parasite, these are the small organism that gives us a negative interaction because only one component gets the benefit while the other was harmed. The host have nothing beneficial, nothing receive nothing beneficial from the parasite, but the parasite extract the nutrients from the host, so it gets the benefit. Commensalism, it refers to, it sounds like a parasitism, but um, both one component has no negative effect. Like for example, commensalism. We have a termite. A termite, meron siyang natural commensal, but a certain invertebrate in its gut. But it doesn't harm the termite. It also, this invertebrate found in its gut got the nourishment as the termite eats. So nothing happens to the termite. Another example of commensalism, we have humans and the Ecoli. The Ecoli in a controlled population in the gut of the human will only get the nutrients, break down the food as the human eats the food and passes through the intestine. Now, the humans have no beneficial effect to the bacteria called the E. coli, but the E. coli enjoys the food it, within the gut of the human. So, in normal population, the E. coli will never show a harmful effect to the human. Next, mutualism. Mutualism that both parties got the benefit from each other. So, we have a good example of mutualism in which a tree and a bird. Okay. The bird acquire food from the tree by looking its termites on the holes, and at the same time it helps in pollination, and sometimes also the bird ate the fruit from the tree. So those are the benefits received by the bird coming from the tree. Okay, what are the benefits received by the tree from the bird? So the bird helps the tree from pollination. It also protects the tree from parasites, insects like burying its stem, so the bird ate those parasites. So those are some of the benefits. So they have give and take relationship. So this is an example of parasitism, the tick, and of a large vertebrate. We have another commensalism. We have the barnacle. The barnacle in smaller population may not give a harmful effect to a certain sea turtle. But if this population of barnacle overpopulates, then the shell becomes heavier and the turtle will have a hard time swimming. And sometimes these barnacles will also reach to their head and covers their eyesight. So that blinded the turtle from its way. So it may reach to negative effect, but at the beginning it may show no negative effect towards the turtle. So this is a mutualism, a carabao, and an egret. So sa Filipino tawag natin tagak. So egret will pick up the ticks that sticks on the skin of the carabao. And the carabao will give relief from those ticks, especially the bark portion which cannot be reached by their heads. So the birds will pick up those ticks and the carabaos will be free from ectoparasite. So the carabao, with the help of their parasites, the ticks will serve as the food for the bird and relief naman sa carabao. Other interspecific adaptations, we have the camouflage, which is a certain type of adaptation to some animals in which the animal's patterns help hide the animal within the ecosystem. We have cryptic coloration, counter shading, aposematic coloration, when the animal shows the predator their condition by conspicuous coloration. Mimicry, when species resembles other species that are harmful. So let's have an example. We have cryptic coloration. We have here, based on the diagram, we have here a constrictor, a python. A python cannot be seen when it passes through a substrate containing dried leaves. So they cannot easily be seen. So that is cryptic coloration because the coloration of the skin of the python would match to the color of the dried leaves on the ground. Counter shading. When we say counter shading, the dorsal portion of the animal is darker and the ventral portion is lighter. Another example of counter shading is shark. The shark, if you went to diving, if you have encountered a shark, okay, the shark, when they swim over you, you will see that the counter shading of the shark, the white portion of the shark, will camouflage or reflect as the sky, blue sky. Now, when you are on the surface, above surface, or you are above the shark, you will not able to see the shark below you because the dark coloration of the dorsal part of the shark will match to the water background of the water. So darker portion background of the water. So it will blend in. So that is counter shading. Mimicry is the species resembles one or more than other species and gains protection by resemblance. One good example are these butterflies, the coloration, even though they have different patterns. Now this would resembles to a butterfly that is not tasteful, that have an awful taste to some predators. So with this kind of pattern, some predators will leave this butterfly or they move away from this butterfly because for them this will give them a message that this butterfly is not palatable. In short, it tastes bad. Communities, all population living in an area that is all considered as community. So, but in a community, they could either be dominant species. When say dominant species, um, most these are the species that has a higher number of, or in terms of population of a certain area. Community species diversity richness characterized by variety of species contained. So, for example, um, the richness of the rice field vegetation is not that rich when compared to the forest vegetation. Why? Because in a rice field vegetation, you could only find few species of plants in that area compared to the forest ecosystem. You have there several species of plants. So the forest is rich in terms of vegetation compared to the rice field. Now, what is ecological niche? This includes all the attributes of an animal's lifestyle. This is the natural habitat of the animal. Like for example, your natural ecological niche is your home. And when you transfer from another home, that is already a different niche for you. And sometimes you might feel uncomfortable. The same thing with the animals, like for example, the Philippine eagle. The natural ecological niche of the eagles are the forest in Mindanao or Philippines. But once we transfer them to another country like um, in Canada, it is not fitted for them already because it was too cold and the type of trees that being used for building nest was not ideal for them. So that is no longer their natural niche. Community stability. When we say community stability, that an environment must have undergo succession. But in an environment that undergoes succession, it also arrive in certain stages. It may undergo certain stages. Like for example, serial stage, series, primary, secondary, community level. So, in a community stability, for example, the environment is barren or no plants, it's totally empty. We have there only the soil. Then, the first group of organisms that occupies the area are called the pioneer community. These are the first community to become established in the area. So we have there the serial stage, the series, and the climax community. Now, when we say the climax community, it replaces the pioneering species and replaced by the large species like trees. Some animals already enter and lives in that habitat. So that is a climax community. So we have here an example, succession communities. We have the pioneering species. So we have the shrub groups of plants. Not taller animals, taller trees could be seen, and only few animals that thrive in their area. Mostly in this area, you only found the fungus, mosses, mga lumot, mga shrubs, soft-bodied plants. While in intermediate species are located to secondary succession. So this is the secondary succession in which medium height or herbaceous plants started to appear. And in the climax community, you have already bigger trees with bigger roots. Only the shrub plants are only few in population compared to the pioneer or the primary succession. So, habang nag-complex ang community, these plants that short plants, mga herbs, mga herbaceous tend to disappear if the climax vegetation starts to grow. So slowly, the pioneering species will tend to die out because they were covered by the canopies of the trees. In a community, it is important to study the food chain. Kasi knowing the food chain, we may also determine the relationship and the relevance of one animal to the other. So food chain also is a sequence of organisms through which energy moves in an ecosystem. Now, we cannot acquire energy directly by oral or ingesting directly the energy. Energy must be transformed in a potential energy before it becomes a kinetic energy. So, you have to remember the physics. So, kailangan mo na i-transform ang energy into a stored form. In what form? Embedded in a protein, carbohydrates, and so forth. So, food webs, when we have several interlocking food chains. And it is important at the basal part of the food web, we have here the first autotrophic group. Ano to sila? The autotrophs. The autotrophs will serve as the main source of all energy. We have here then followed by the second consumers, tertiary, and the last consumer or the heterotrophs. In the ecosystem aside sa food chain it is important characters to remember. First, we have there the producers. Producers represented by the autotrophs, the algae group, the plants, yung mga bacteria that contains chlorophyll. Next, we have into a simpler form. Murag sila ang tagabalik sa mga chemical that we have taken in. So what will happen if we don't have decomposers? So what happen if we have no decomposers? So we have already that debris, we have several deaths piled up together, and although if no decomposition, no rotting material, nothing to rot, so everything will piled up. Kung fruits yan siya, um, it will not um, it will not undergo rotting, so it always fresh, and the nutrients will not be replenished. So one importance of um, biochemical cycle or geochemical cycle is to recycle also the nutrients taken from the environment, and it should be returned back to the environment. So it will be reused again for the next consumption. Because if this walang nutrient cycle, the nutrients will never be replenished. So everything, all of us will die out.